There are people who think that just because they have money, everyone else is a slave to their desires. Diana Castellanos spoke these words into her phone as she stepped out of the maintenance elevator on the 47th floor of Sterling Tower, Manhattan's most exclusive residential building. Her voice carried the weight of 29 years of hard-earned wisdom and a lifetime of dealing with entitled rich people who thought their bank accounts made them royalty. "I'm telling you, Maria," she continued, adjusting her tool belt while walking down the marble-lined hallway, "this emergency call better be worth triple overtime, because I've had it up to here with these penthouse princes who think—" Crash. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the corridor, followed by a string of curse words that would make a sailor blush. Diana quickened her pace, her steel-toed boots clicking against the polished floor as she approached the source of the commotion. Through the slightly open door of Penthouse 4701, she could see a scene that looked like it belonged in a disaster movie. Water was cascading from a burst pipe in the ceiling, soaking expensive furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than her yearly salary. And standing in the middle of this chaos, looking absolutely furious in his three-piece Savile Row suit, was the most arrogantly handsome man she'd ever laid eyes on. Richard Blackstone, 34 years old, heir to the Blackstone real estate empire, and according to Forbes, one of Manhattan's most eligible bachelors. His jet-black hair was perfectly styled despite the indoor rainfall, his emerald eyes blazed with indignation, and his square jaw was clenched so tight Diana wondered if he might crack a tooth. "This is completely unacceptable," he roared into his platinum phone, seemingly oblivious to the fact that his Italian leather shoes were getting ruined by the flood. "I don't care if it's Sunday night. Get someone up here now. Do you understand me? I said now." Diana rolled her eyes and knocked firmly on the doorframe. "Excuse me, Your Majesty, but I'm the someone they sent." Richard spun around, his eyes scanning her from head to toe with obvious disdain. She knew exactly what he was seeing. A woman in faded work coveralls, her long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, tool belt hanging from her hips, and not a single designer label in sight. Everything about her screamed working class, and everything about his expression screamed disappointed. "They sent you?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "Where's the supervisor? Where's the team? This is a multi-million-dollar penthouse, not some... He gestured vaguely at her appearance. "Some what?" Diana stepped into the penthouse, her boots splashing through the growing puddle. "Some place where a woman in work clothes doesn't belong? Newsflash, Mr. Blackstone. Your precious penthouse is flooding, and I'm the only one standing between you and a complete renovation. You know who I am?" He seemed genuinely surprised. Richard Blackstone, real estate mogul, notorious for firing 3 different property management companies in 6 months. Diana set down her toolkit and looked up at the burst pipe, also known for refusing to update the plumbing in buildings over 50 years old because it's character building. She shot him a pointed look. "How's that character building working out for you now?" Richard's mouth fell open. In his entire adult life, no one had ever spoken to him with such blatant disrespect. Board members trembled in his presence. Business rivals sought his approval. Women typically threw themselves at his feet, or at least his wallet. But this woman, this impossibly infuriating woman in coveralls, was looking at him like he was nothing more than another obstacle in her workday. "Do you have any idea how much I pay in rent for this place?" he demanded, his voice rising above the sound of rushing water. "Do you have any idea how much I charge for emergency Sunday night calls?" Diana shot back, pulling out a wrench that looked like it could double as a weapon. "Especially for customers with attitude problems?" The lights flickered ominously overhead, and Diana glanced up with professional concern. "Great, now we've got electrical issues too. This just keeps getting better." "Electrical issues?" Richard's arrogance faltered for the first time. "Is that dangerous?" "Oh, absolutely." Diana's tone was cheerfully matter-of-fact as she waded through the water toward the main shutoff valve. "Water and electricity? It's like mixing champagne and stupidity. Looks expensive, but someone always gets hurt." "Are you calling me stupid?" Diana paused in her work and turned to face him. a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Blackstone, I don't need to call you anything. Your actions speak for themselves." The power went out completely, plunging the penthouse into darkness. In the sudden silence, broken only by the steady drip of water and the distant hum of the city below, Richard found himself in the unfamiliar position of being completely dependent on someone else. Now what? His voice had lost some of its commanding edge. Diana's laugh was warm and surprisingly infectious in the darkness. "Now, Your Majesty, you get to learn what it's like when money can't solve your problems." The beam of her flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating her face with a soft glow. "Don't worry. I'll try to make this as painless as possible. For both of us." Richard stared at her illuminated face, struck by how beautiful she looked when she wasn't rolling her eyes at him. For the first time in years, he felt something other than boredom or irritation. He felt curious. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Diana," she replied, already turning back to her work. "Diana Castellanos. Try to remember it. You'll want to know who to thank when this is all over." As she began working on the pipes, humming softly to herself, Richard realized that his perfectly ordered world had just been turned completely upside down. And somehow, he wasn't entirely sure he minded. Some people never learn that pride comes before the fall, and sometimes the fall is exactly what they need. Diana's words echoed through the marble lobby of Sterling Tower as she packed her tools 3 hours later. The emergency repair was complete. Richard's penthouse was no longer flooding, and she should have felt satisfied with another job well done. Instead, she couldn't shake the image of those emerald eyes staring at her in the darkness, or the way his voice had softened when he asked her name. "Ridiculous," she muttered to herself, shouldering her heavy toolkit. "Absolutely ridiculous, Diana. He's everything you hate about rich people." But as she waited for the elevator, her phone buzzed with a text that made her heart skip. "Thank you for tonight. RB." 47 floors above, Richard stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, still wearing his water-damaged suit, watching Diana's maintenance van disappear into the Manhattan traffic. His reflection in the glass showed a man who looked nothing like the confident CEO who had started this evening. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was ruined, and for the first time in years he felt humbled. "Sir?" Marcus Chen, his long-suffering personal assistant, appeared in the doorway holding a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd been dealing with Richard's moods for 5 years. "The insurance adjuster will be here tomorrow morning, and I've arranged for the cleaning crew to—" "Marcus," Richard interrupted, turning from the window with a strange gleam in his eyes. "What do you know about Diana Castellanos?" Marcus blinked in surprise. In all his years working for Richard, his boss had never asked about service personnel. "The electrician? Well, she owns her own repair company, Castellanos Electric. Graduated top of her class from Brooklyn Technical College. Has a reputation for being incredibly skilled but difficult with entitled clients." "Difficult?" Richard's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "She called me Your Majesty and told me my money couldn't solve my problems." "She... what?" Marcus nearly dropped his tablet. "Sir, if she was disrespectful, I can ensure she's never called for service again." "No." Richard's voice was firm. "Actually, I want you to find out everything about her. Where she lives, what she likes, her favorite coffee shop, everything." Marcus stared at his boss as if he'd grown a second head. "Sir, are you planning to have her fired from other buildings? Because that seems extreme even for—" "I'm planning to prove her wrong." Richard straightened his tie, a gesture that usually meant he was about to make a decision that would change everything. "She thinks I'm just another spoiled rich boy who's never worked for anything. Well, Marcus, it's time to show Miss Castellanos exactly what Richard Blackstone is capable of." The next morning, Diana was enjoying her usual breakfast at Rosie's Diner, a greasy spoon cafe in Queens that served the best coffee and worst health code violations in the borough, when her phone rang. "Castellanos Electric, Diana speaking." Miss Castellanos, this is Jennifer Walsh from Manhattan Property Management. We have an unusual request. Diana nearly choked on her coffee. Manhattan Property Management handled the most exclusive buildings in the city. Unusual how? One of our most important clients has specifically requested you for a week-long project, full electrical system inspection and upgrade for a more modest property. The pay is... There was a pause. Well, let's just say it's generous enough to take a vacation afterward. Diana sat up straighter. A week's work that paid enough for a vacation? That was unheard of in her industry. What's the catch? No catch, just very specific requirements. The client wants the work done personally by you during business hours and... Another pause. He's requested that the property owner be present to oversee the work. Every instinct Diana had developed in 10 years of dealing with difficult customers started screaming warnings. Who's the property owner? A Mr. Robert Blake. He's apparently new to property ownership and wants to learn about electrical systems firsthand. Something about this felt wrong, but the money was too good to pass up. Diana had been saving for months to visit her sister in Puerto Rico, and this job would finally make it possible. Fine, she said against her better judgment. Send me the address. Excellent. Oh, and Miss Castellanos? Mr. Blake specifically mentioned he's looking forward to working with someone who isn't afraid to speak their mind. Diana stared at her phone after hanging up. Those words sounded familiar, almost like an echo of her confrontation with Richard Blackstone. But that was impossible. Men like Richard Blackstone didn't even remember the names of people like her. 2 hours later, Diana stood outside a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, triple-checking the address. This wasn't the kind of property that Manhattan Property Management usually handled. It was nice, recently renovated with flower boxes in the windows and a freshly painted front door, but it was definitely not penthouse material. She was still puzzling over this when the front door opened, and out stepped the most surprisingly handsome man she'd seen since last night. Robert Blake had sandy brown hair instead of jet black, wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt instead of a designer suit, and had warm brown eyes instead of piercing green ones. But there was something about the way he carried himself, something about that jawline that made Diana take a second look. "You must be Diana," he said, extending his hand with a smile that was charming without being arrogant. "I'm Rob. Thanks for taking on this project." Diana shook his hand, noting the calluses that suggested actual manual labor. "Nice to meet you, Rob. So you're new to property ownership?" "Brand new," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "I inherited this place from my uncle, and honestly, I don't know the first thing about electrical systems. I was hoping you could teach me while you work." There was something endearing about his honesty, so different from the entitled attitude she usually encountered. Diana found herself smiling. "Well, Rob, you've come to the right person. Fair warning, though. I'm not known for sugarcoating things." "Good," Rob said, his eyes twinkling with something that looked almost like mischief. "I prefer people who tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable." As Diana followed him into the brownstone, she couldn't shake the feeling that this week was going to be full of surprises. What she didn't know was that 47 floors above Manhattan, Richard Blackstone was watching a live security feed on his phone, wearing the most genuine smile he'd had in years. The game had begun, and for the first time in his life, Richard wasn't entirely sure who was going to win. But he was absolutely certain it was going to be worth finding out. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, especially when they start feeling like the truth. Day 3 of the electrical project, and Richard Blackstone was discovering that pretending to be a normal person was both the hardest and most rewarding thing he'd ever done. As Rob Blake, he'd spent the morning learning to rewire outlets under Diana's patient instruction, getting genuine calluses on his hands for the first time in his privileged life, and finding himself completely captivated by a woman who had no idea she was teaching a billionaire how to use a screwdriver. No, Rob," Diana laughed, gently correcting his grip on the wire strippers. "You're holding it like it's going to bite you. Here, let me show you again." Her hands covered his, guiding his fingers to the proper position, and Richard felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with the wiring. This close, He could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean, not the expensive perfumes he was used to, and see the tiny scar above her left eyebrow that somehow made her even more beautiful. "Got it?" she asked, stepping back with a professional smile that made his heart race. "Yeah," he managed, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. "You're a good teacher, Diana." "I should be. I've been doing this for 10 years. She picked up her voltage tester and moved to the next outlet. "Started working with my dad when I was 16. He always said electricity doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your bank account. It just cares whether you respect it or not." Richard paused in his work. "Your father taught you?" "Before he passed away 5 years ago, yeah." Diana's voice softened. "He was the best electrician in Queens, but more than that, he was the most honest man I ever knew. Never charged more than fair, never did work that wasn't needed, and never let anyone, rich or poor, treat him like he was less than." The weight of her words hit Richard like a physical blow. Here was a woman who'd learned her values from a man who embodied everything Richard had never been taught: integrity, fairness, respect for others regardless of their social status. "He sounds like an amazing man," Richard said quietly. He was. Diana looked up from her work, studying Rob's face with curious eyes. "You know, you remind me of him sometimes. The way you actually listen when I explain things. How you don't act like manual work is beneath you. Most guys with college degrees think they're too good to get their hands dirty." Richard's stomach twisted with guilt. If only she knew that his college degree was actually an MBA from Harvard, and that until 3 days ago, the closest he'd come to manual labor was signing checks. "What about you?" Diana continued, apparently unaware of his internal crisis. "What did you do before inheriting this place?" This was the moment Richard had been dreading. Marcus had created an entire backstory for Rob Blake, middle management at an insurance company, recently laid off, no family money, but looking into Diana's trusting brown eyes, he found himself wanting to tell her everything. "I worked in corporate environments," he said carefully, "but honestly, I hated it. All the politics, the way people treated each other like stepping stones. I'm hoping this inheritance gives me a chance to do something more meaningful." It wasn't entirely a lie, Richard realized. He did hate the corporate politics, and being here with Diana was the first time in years he'd felt like he was doing something that mattered. "That's brave," Diana said, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. "Most people are too scared to change their lives even when they're miserable." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Richard's phone buzzing. His real phone, the one he'd forgotten to put on silent. The custom ringtone, a classical piece that cost more than most people's monthly rent, filled the room. Diana raised an eyebrow. Fancy ringtone for an unemployed guy. Richard's heart pounded as he quickly silenced the phone, but not before seeing the caller ID. "Mother, Blackstone Estate." "Sorry, wrong phone," he mumbled, shoving it deep into his pocket. "That's my cousin's. He left it in my jacket." Diana's expression shifted slightly, a small crease appearing between her eyebrows. For a terrifying moment, Richard thought she might press the issue, but then her professional mask slipped back into place. "Right," she said slowly. "Well, should we get back to work?" But something had changed. Richard could feel it in the way she looked at him now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. He'd made a mistake, and Diana Castellanos was clearly not the type of woman who missed details. Later that afternoon, while Richard was supposedly running to the hardware store, Diana found herself alone in the brownstone with a growing list of questions. Rob's story didn't add up. The calluses on his hands were too fresh, his knowledge of basic household tasks too limited for someone who'd supposedly lived on his own for years. And then there was that phone call. Unable to resist, Diana did something she'd never done before. She snooped. A quick search through the kitchen drawers revealed something that made her blood run cold. A set of keys with a Sterling Tower keychain, and beneath them, a business card that read, "Marcus Chen, personal assistant to Richard Blackstone, CEO, Blackstone Industries." Diana's hands shook as the pieces fell into place. The too-perfect job offer. The mysterious client who wanted to learn about electrical work. The way Rob carried himself like someone accustomed to being obeyed. And those eyes. She'd been so focused on the different color that she'd missed the shape, the intensity that she'd seen burning with arrogance just 4 nights ago. Robert Blake was Richard Blackstone. The sound of the front door opening made her quickly shove the evidence back into the drawer. Richard, whoever he was, walked in carrying a bag from the hardware store and wearing that charming smile that she now realized was probably as fake as everything else about him. "Miss me?" he asked cheerfully, then stopped when he saw her expression. "Diana? Is everything okay?" She stared at him, this man who had lied to her for 3 days, who had made her feel things she hadn't felt in years, who had somehow made her forget every lesson her father had taught her about trusting people with money and power. "You know what's funny, Rob?" she said, her voice deceptively calm, as she picked up her wire strippers, a tool that suddenly felt very much like a weapon. "I was just thinking about what my father used to say about people who lie." Richard's face went pale. "Diana, I can explain. He used to say that the rich lie because they think they can afford the consequences." Diana took a step toward him, her dark eyes blazing with betrayal and fury. "Tell me, Mr. Blackstone, what exactly did you think you could afford here?" The hardware store bag fell from Richard's nerveless fingers, tools scattering across the hardwood floor like the pieces of whatever he'd hoped to build with Diana Castellanos. The game was over. And from the look in Diana's eyes, Richard was about to learn that some consequences were more expensive than even he could afford. Trust is like electricity. It takes years to build the right connections, but only one wrong move to burn everything down. The silence in the Brooklyn brownstone was deafening. Diana stood frozen, wire strippers still gripped in her hand like a shield, while Richard, because there was no point pretending to be Rob anymore, looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, his fake brown contact lenses making his deception seem even more pathetic now that it was exposed. Diana laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I figured it out about 10 minutes ago, but looking back, I should have known from day one." She gestured at his hands where the fresh calluses were already forming blisters. "These hands have never done a day's honest work in their life, have they, Mr. Blackstone?" Richard flinched at the formal address. For 3 days, hearing her say Rob with warmth and growing affection had been like a drug. Now Mr. Blackstone sounded like a death sentence. "Diana, please let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice rose, 3 days of suppressed suspicion exploding into pure fury. "Explain how you played me, how you turned my job into some kind of sick entertainment, how you made me feel like maybe, just maybe, there was one decent guy left in this world who wasn't trying to use me." She threw the wire strippers down so hard they bounced off the hardwood floor. "Or maybe you want to explain how you've been laughing at the stupid poor girl who was actually starting to care about you." "I wasn't laughing." Richard stepped forward, desperation clear in his voice. "Diana, I swear to you I wasn't laughing. What happened between us, everything I felt, it was real." "Real?" Diana's eyes flashed dangerously. "You want to talk about real? Real is me working 16-hour days to keep my business afloat. Real is choosing between fixing my van or buying groceries. Real is watching my father die because he couldn't afford the good doctors that people like you see for paper cuts." Each word hit Richard like a physical blow. He'd known Diana was struggling financially. The worn coveralls, the 10-year-old van, the way her eyes had lit up when she mentioned the generous pay for this job. But hearing it laid out like this, understanding that his casual wealth represented everything she'd been fighting against her entire life, made him feel sick. "You think this is some kind of romantic comedy?" Diana continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Where the rich guy learns some valuable lessons about the common people and gets the girl. Well, here's a reality check. This isn't Pretty Woman, and I'm not some project for you to fix or trophy for you to win." "That's not what this was," Richard said desperately. "Diana, yes, I lied about who I was, but everything else, getting to know you, learning from you, the way I feel about you, that was never fake. How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" Diana's voice cracked completely now, and Richard could see tears threatening to spill over. For 3 days, I've been falling for a man who doesn't exist. Rob Blake, who inherited his uncle's house, who wanted to learn an honest trade, who made me believe that maybe there were still good men in the world. He's not real, is he? Richard felt his heart shatter. Because she was right. Rob Blake, the man who had earned her smiles and her trust, who had felt worthy of her growing affection, was a complete fiction. And Richard Blackstone, arrogant, entitled, used to buying whatever he wanted, was exactly the type of man she despised. The man you got to know, he said quietly. The one who listened to your stories about your father, who wanted to learn from you, who thinks you're the most incredible woman he's ever met. That part was real. That was me, Diana. The real me, maybe for the first time in my life. Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of electrical grease on her cheek. Don't you dare try to make this about your personal growth. Don't you dare make me feel sorry for the poor little rich boy who finally discovered he has feelings. She started gathering her tools with sharp, angry movements. You know what the worst part is? For 3 days, I actually thought I'd misjudged you that night in your penthouse. I thought maybe you weren't just another arrogant millionaire who thinks the world exists for his entertainment. I'm not, Richard started. Yes, you are. Diana whirled on him, her professional composure completely shattered. This whole thing, hiring me, creating this elaborate lie, making me trust you, it's exactly what a man like you would do. You saw something you wanted, and you decided to take it, no matter who got hurt in the process. Richard stood there watching the woman he'd fallen in love with pack up her life and prepare to walk away forever, and realized that everything she was saying was absolutely true. He had seen something he wanted, her respect, her affection, her fire, and he'd manipulated the situation to get it. You're right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're completely right about everything. I am exactly the kind of man you think I am. I saw you that night and I couldn't stop thinking about you, and instead of trying to become someone worthy of your respect, I created a lie. Diana paused in her packing, something in his tone making her look up. But Diana, Richard continued, his voice getting stronger. These 3 days with you have been the best of my life. Not because I was fooling you, but because for the first time ever I felt like I was becoming someone I could actually respect. Someone my father might have been proud of instead of the shallow, entitled man he raised. Stop, Diana said, but her voice had lost some of its venom. I know you'll never forgive me, Richard pressed on, and I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that meeting you, the real you, not some fantasy version, changed everything for me. You made me want to be better, Diana. You made me want to earn your respect instead of buying it. Diana closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she gripped her toolkit. It doesn't matter what you wanted to become, Richard. What matters is what you chose to do, and you chose to lie to me. She shouldered her bag and walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. That night in your penthouse when the lights went out and you asked my name, for just a moment, I saw something in you that seemed real, human. Her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it. I wish that man had been brave enough to call me himself instead of hiding behind Rob Blake. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Richard alone in the brownstone that was supposed to be his fresh start. He sank onto the couch, still wearing his disguise of ordinary clothes, and realized that he just lost the only woman who had ever made him want to be extraordinary. Outside, Diana sat in her van for a full 10 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have. You deserve the truth from the beginning. Richard. She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some mistakes, she told herself, were too expensive to forgive. But as she drove back to Queens, Diana couldn't shake the memory of how Richard's eyes had looked when he talked about becoming someone better. Almost like he'd meant it. Almost. Sometimes the only way to prove you've changed is to give up everything that made you think you were better than everyone else. 2 weeks had passed since Diana walked out of the Brooklyn brownstone, and Richard Blackstone was discovering what it felt like to live in a world where money couldn't solve his problems. He sat in Rosie's diner at 6 a.m., wearing actual work clothes that he'd bought with his own hands, nursing his third cup of coffee and waiting for Diana to show up for her usual breakfast. This was day 14 of his vigil, day 14 of being ignored, avoided, and treated like the plague by the only woman who'd ever made him want to be better. But Richard had learned patience in these 2 weeks, along with humility, persistence, and the particular ache of genuine heartbreak. "You're that rich boy, aren't you?" Richard looked up to find Rosie herself, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, standing beside his booth with a coffee pot and a disapproving frown. "Yes, ma'am," Richard said simply. He'd given up denying it after the first week, when his story had apparently become neighborhood gossip. "Thought so." Rosie refilled his cup without being asked. "Diana's told me all about you. Says you're a lying snake who thinks poor people are toys for rich boys to play with." Each word hit like a knife, but Richard didn't flinch. "She's not wrong." Rosie's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that's not what I expected you to say." "Mrs. Rosie," Richard said, looking up at her with tired but determined eyes. "I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about everything Diana said to me, and she was right about all of it. I am exactly the kind of man she thinks I am, but I'm trying to become the kind of man she deserves. By stalking her at her favorite breakfast spot? By proving that I can change," Richard corrected. "By showing her that Rob Blake, the man she started caring about, wasn't completely fake. He was just buried under 34 years of privilege and arrogance." Rosie studied him for a long moment. "What makes you think a girl like Diana would ever want anything to do with a boy like you?" "Honestly?" Richard's voice was raw with exhaustion and hope. "I don't know if she will, but I know she's the first person who ever made me want to earn something instead of buying it, and that's worth fighting for." The diner's bell chimed, and both Richard and Rosie turned to see Diana walking in, her work clothes clean but worn, her hair pulled back in its practical ponytail. She stopped dead when she saw Richard, her expression cycling through surprise, anger, and something that might have been pain. "I'll be right back," Rosie murmured, and disappeared into the kitchen with uncharacteristic tact. Diana stood frozen by the door for a moment, then squared her shoulders and walked to her usual corner booth, pointedly ignoring Richard's existence. But Richard had learned something about persistence in the past 2 weeks, and he got up and followed her. "Diana, please," he said quietly, stopping beside her table. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "I already gave you 5 minutes," Diana replied without looking up from her menu. "I gave you 3 days. That was more than you deserved." "You're right," Richard said, and something in his tone made her glance up. "You're absolutely right. But I'm not asking as Richard Blackstone, CEO of anything. I'm asking as the guy who learned that working with your hands feels better than signing checks. As the man who discovered that earning someone's respect is worth more than buying their obedience." Diana's eyes flicked over his appearance, the genuine work clothes, the calloused hands, the exhaustion that came from 2 weeks of physical labor. "What are you wearing?" "Work clothes," Richard said simply. "I got a job, Diana. Construction crew in Queens. Turns out when you don't have connections or a trust fund to fall back on, you have to actually earn your paycheck." "You got a job," Diana repeated slowly, disbelief clear in her voice. "Richard Blackstone, billionaire CEO, got a construction job." "Former CEO," Richard corrected. "I resigned, gave my shares to charity, and my position to someone who actually deserves it. Turns out running a company you inherited isn't the same as building something with your own hands." Diana stared at him, speechless. The man standing before her looked like Richard, those unmistakable green eyes, that strong jawline. But everything else was different. His hands were rough with real calluses, his clothes were actually dirty from work, and there was something in his posture that spoke of genuine humility instead of practiced charm. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you were right about everything," Richard said, sliding uninvited into the booth across from her. "I was spoiled, entitled, and completely out of touch with reality. I thought I could fix that by pretending to be someone else, but that was just another form of manipulation." He leaned forward, his eyes intense, but no longer arrogant. So, I decided to become someone else for real. Not Rob Blake, that was a lie, but a version of Richard Blackstone who might actually deserve a woman like you. Richard, Diana's voice was soft, uncertain. I know you don't believe me, he continued quickly. I know you think this is just another game, another manipulation, and maybe it started that way. But Diana, these 2 weeks of working beside people who've never had anything handed to them, of earning every dollar and every ounce of respect, it's the first time in my life I felt like I actually mattered. Rosie appeared with coffee for Diana and a meaningful look that suggested she'd been listening to every word. You can't just change your entire life because of one conversation, Diana said, but her anger was wavering. I didn't change my life because of one conversation, Richard replied. I changed it because of 3 days of being treated like a human being instead of a bank account. Because of working beside someone who valued integrity over net worth. Because I fell in love with a woman who made me want to be worthy of her. The words hung in the air between them. Diana's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands. You don't love me, she said quietly. You love the challenge. You love the idea of conquering something you couldn't buy. Maybe that's how it started, Richard admitted, but it's not how it ended. Diana, when you walked out of that brownstone, I realized I'd rather be nobody to you than somebody who disappointed you. I'd rather work construction for the rest of my life and see you smile at me once than go back to being a man you couldn't respect. Diana was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if looking for traces of the arrogant man she'd met in the penthouse. Prove it, she said finally. How? Diana reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, worn and creased, with her father's company logo. My dad's old crew is working on a community center in the Bronx. Volunteers only, no pay, just people trying to help their neighborhood. If you really want to prove you've changed, show up tomorrow at 7 a.m. and work beside people who will never be able to do anything for Richard Blackstone. She stood up, leaving money for her untouched coffee. And Richard, if you're trying to impress me, don't bother. If you're trying to prove something to yourself, then maybe we can talk. As she walked toward the door, Diana paused and looked back. Oh, and the brown contacts? Lose them. If you're going to be yourself completely. Richard sat alone in the booth, holding the business card like it was a lifeline. Tomorrow at 7 a.m. he would face the ultimate test, not proving himself to Diana, but proving to himself that the man he was becoming was real. For the first time in 2 weeks, Richard Blackstone smiled a genuine smile. He had work to do. True love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone who makes you want to be perfect for them. The Bronx Community Center was a testament to hope over circumstance. What had once been an abandoned warehouse was slowly being transformed into a safe haven for neighborhood kids, thanks to the volunteer efforts of people who had little to give except their time and sweat. At 6:45 a.m. on a crisp Saturday morning, Richard Blackstone stood outside the chain-link fence wearing his most comfortable work clothes and carrying a toolbox he'd bought with his own construction wages. He wasn't the only one arriving early. Diana's van pulled up just as the sun was painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Richard felt his heart leap when she stepped out. She was wearing her father's old work jacket, faded denim with Castellanos Electric embroidered on the chest, and when she saw Richard, her expression was carefully neutral. You came, she said simply. Did you think I wouldn't? Diana studied his face, taking in the determination in his green eyes. Honestly, part of me hoped you would, and part of me hoped you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you want me here? Because, Diana said softly, if you're really who you're pretending to be now, it means I have to forgive you. And forgiving you means admitting that I've been miserable for 2 weeks because I fell in love with a man who might actually exist. Richard's breath caught. Diana, don't, she interrupted, holding up a hand. Not yet. Show me first. Show me who Richard Blackstone really is when nobody's watching and there's nothing in it for him. The workday that followed was unlike anything Richard had ever experienced. Under the guidance of Miguel Santos, a 60-year-old electrician who had worked with Diana's father for 20 years, Richard found himself running electrical lines for a computer lab that would serve kids who had never owned their own laptops. "Your girlfriend says you're learning the trade," Miguel commented as they worked side by side, installing outlet boxes. "She's not my girlfriend," Richard said, trying to keep the disappointment out of his voice. Miguel grinned. "That's not what her eyes say when she looks at you." Richard glanced across the room where Diana was teaching a group of teenage volunteers how to safely strip wire. She was patient, encouraging, and completely in her element. Everything that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. "Miguel," Richard said carefully, "what was Diana's father really like?" The older man's expression grew thoughtful. "Eduardo was the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back, but he'd make sure you earned it first. He believed that everyone deserved respect, but respect had to be mutual." Miguel looked pointedly at Richard. He also believed that people could change, if they wanted it badly enough. As the day progressed, Richard found himself working harder than he ever had in his life. When one of the teenage volunteers, a kid named Carlos, struggled with a particularly difficult connection, Richard spent his lunch break teaching him the technique Miguel had shown him earlier. "Why are you helping me?" Carlos asked suspiciously. "You don't even know me." Richard paused, wire strippers in hand, and realized the answer came from a part of himself that hadn't existed a month ago. "Because someone helped me when I didn't deserve it, and maybe someday you'll help someone else who needs it." From across the room, Diana watched this interaction with growing amazement. The man patiently teaching Carlos bore no resemblance to the arrogant billionaire who had demanded immediate service in his penthouse. This was someone who had learned that respect was earned, not bought. "He's different," said Maria Santos, Miguel's wife, appearing beside Diana with 2 cups of coffee. "People don't really change," Diana replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't they?" Maria smiled knowingly. "My Miguel was an angry young man when I met him. Got into fights, thought the world owed him something. But love has a way of showing us who we could be, if we're brave enough to try." As the afternoon wore on, a crisis emerged. The main electrical panel, which was supposed to be installed by a professional crew the following week, had been damaged in delivery. Without it, weeks of volunteer work would be wasted, and the community center's opening would be delayed indefinitely. "We can't afford another panel right now," Miguel said grimly, staring at the damaged equipment. The budget was already stretched to the limit. Richard stepped forward and, for a moment, everyone waited for him to offer to buy a replacement, the kind of solution his money could provide. Instead, he surprised them all. "What if we rebuild this one?" he suggested. "It's mostly the housing that's damaged. The internal components look salvageable." "That's incredibly difficult work," Miguel warned. "It would take someone with serious skills and a lot of patience." "Then it's a good thing we have Diana," Richard said, looking directly at her. "She's the best electrician I've ever worked with." Diana felt her heart skip. There was no manipulation in his voice, no agenda, just genuine respect for her abilities. "I can't do it alone," she said quietly. "You won't be alone," Richard replied. "I may not be an expert, but I'm a pretty good student when I have the right teacher." What followed were the most intense 6 hours of Diana's professional life. Working with Richard to rebuild the electrical panel required perfect coordination, absolute trust, and the kind of partnership that couldn't be faked. Richard followed her instructions with complete focus, asked intelligent questions, and never once tried to take control or show off. When they finally installed the rebuilt panel and flipped the switch, the community center blazed to life with warm, welcoming light. The cheer from the volunteers was deafening, but all Richard could see was the smile on Diana's face, proud, genuine, and maybe, just maybe, meant for him. As the other volunteers began cleaning up, Diana found herself alone with Richard in the electrical room they'd spent the day rewiring. "You did good work today," she said quietly. "I had a good teacher." Richard's voice was soft, tentative. "Diana, I know I have no right to ask this, but ask anyway." Richard took a deep breath. "I know I can't undo the lie I told you. I know I can't change the fact that I started this whole thing for the wrong reasons. But the man who worked beside you today, who's been learning what it means to earn something instead of buying it, that's who I want to be. Not for you, but because you showed me that version of myself was possible." Diana looked into his eyes, those green eyes that had first captured her attention in his penthouse, but now held something she'd never seen there before: humility. "The Richard Blackstone I met 3 weeks ago," she said slowly, "was everything I hate about people with money and power. But the man who spent today teaching Carlos how to strip wire, who worked 6 hours to rebuild a panel for kids he'll never meet again." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "That man reminds me of my father." "Diana, I'm not finished," she interrupted, but she was smiling through tears. "That man is someone I could love, someone I do love if he's real." Richard reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "He's real, Diana. You made him real." "Then prove it," Diana whispered. "Kiss me like you're Rob Blake, but be Richard Blackstone." Richard cupped her face in his calloused hands, hands that had learned the value of honest work, and kissed her with all the tenderness of a man who had finally learned the difference between wanting something and deserving it. When they broke apart, Diana smiled that dimpled smile that had captured his heart in the darkness of his penthouse. "So," she said, her voice playfully serious, "what does a reformed billionaire do for his second act?" "Well," Richard grinned, "I was thinking about starting an electrical contracting business. I hear I might be able to convince the best electrician in Queens to be my partner." "Partner, huh?" Diana raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think she'd want to work with someone who's only been doing this for 3 weeks?" "Because," Richard said, pulling her closer, "he's willing to spend the rest of his life learning from her." 6 months later, Castellanos and Blackstone Electric was the most sought-after contracting company in New York. Not because they were the cheapest, but because they were the most honest. Richard had learned to love the feel of wire in his hands almost as much as he loved the woman who had taught him that true wealth couldn't be inherited, only earned. And in the community center in the Bronx, there was a small plaque beside the main electrical panel that read, "In memory of Eduardo Castellanos, who believed everyone deserved a second chance to do the right thing." Diana kept that plaque polished until it gleamed, because it reminded her that sometimes the best love stories begin with someone learning to see past their own reflection. The explosion echoed through the marble corridors of the Westbrook estate like thunder on a clear day. Crystal fragments danced through the air in slow motion, catching the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a kaleidoscope of rainbow reflections across the pristine white walls. But Luna Delacroix wasn't admiring the beauty of destruction. She was watching in horror as her boss, the devastatingly handsome billionaire Davis Westbrook, stood frozen beneath the remnants of a priceless 19th-century baccarat chandelier, his perfectly sculpted face dripping with what used to be his morning espresso. Time seemed suspended in that crystalline moment. Davis's steel-gray eyes, usually sharp enough to cut through corporate boardrooms and multi-million-dollar deals, now blinked in complete bewilderment. His midnight black hair, normally slicked back with mathematical precision, was tousled from the impact, making him look less like a Fortune 500 CEO and more like a male model who just rolled out of bed. "Sweet mother of pearl," Luna whispered, her Brazilian accent thickening with panic as she dropped her crystal cleaner and rushed toward him, her worn canvas sneakers squeaking against the marble like a symphony of embarrassment. "Mr. Westbrook, I am so sorry. I was polishing the chandelier chain and you walked underneath and my elbow caught the coffee cup and—" "Did you just declare war on me with a beverage?" Davis's voice carried that smooth Manhattan aristocrat tone that made Luna's stomach perform aerial acrobatics every single time she heard it. Despite being covered in coffee, his lips curved into a smile that could have stopped traffic in Times Square. Luna's hands fluttered around him like nervous butterflies, clutching paper towels that suddenly seemed as useful as tissue paper in a hurricane. The proximity was intoxicating. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine with notes of bergamot and sandalwood that probably cost more than her family's monthly grocery budget back in Rio. "Please don't fire me," she pleaded, dabbing frantically at his Italian silk tie. I have 3 jobs, and if I lose this one, my little brother can't finish his engineering program, and my grandmother needs her medication and... Luna. Davis caught her wrists gently, his touch sending electricity shooting up her arms like lightning. Breathe. It's just coffee, and an irreplaceable chandelier that's been in my family for 6 generations. The color drained from Luna's face so quickly, she looked like she might faint. 6 generations? Oh, Deus, I've destroyed your family history. I'll work for free. I'll clean every room in this mansion twice. You'll give yourself a panic attack, Davis interrupted, his laugh rich and warm, completely at odds with his reputation as the ruthless CEO who'd built Westbrook Industries into a global empire before his 30th birthday. Besides, I was getting tired of that chandelier anyway. It was far too pretentious, don't you think? Pretentious? Luna's voice cracked. Sir, it was probably worth more than my entire neighborhood. Probably. His grin was pure mischief, the kind that suggested he found this chaos infinitely more entertaining than his usual morning routine of hostile takeovers and merger negotiations. But I've never seen anything quite as spectacular as your chandelier-demolishing technique. Where did you learn that? Before Luna could answer, the mansion's head butler, Pemberton, materialized as if summoned by some invisible force, his expression a masterpiece of British restraint, barely containing what could only be described as complete horror. Mr. Westbrook, shall I contact the restoration specialist? And perhaps a hazmat team? Just the dry cleaner will suffice, Pemberton. Davis's eyes never left Luna's face as she continued her futile mission to repair the damage. And clear my morning schedule. Pemberton's eyebrow twitched, the equivalent of a full emotional breakdown for the unflappable butler. Sir? But you have the Morrison acquisition meeting at 10, and the board expects... The board can wait. Miss Delacroix owes me a proper cup of coffee, and I intend to collect. Davis's smile could have powered the entire Upper East Side. Besides, I have some rather significant news to share with everyone today. Consider this a dress rehearsal. Luna's cleaning cloth froze mid-dab. You want me to make you coffee? But Mr. Westbrook, I'm just the woman who just gave me the most excitement I've experienced since I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Davis's fingers brushed hers as he took the cloth, his touch gentle but firm. And please call me Davis. After what we've just been through together, I think we're past formalities. As if choreographed by fate itself, the sound of designer heels clicking against marble echoed through the foyer like a countdown to doom. Davis, darling, what in God's name is all this commotion? Evangeline Ashworth Sterling descended the grand staircase like a runway model, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves that defied both gravity and common sense. Everything about her screamed old money and new attitude, from her limited edition Chanel suit to the diamond necklace that caught the light like captured stars. She was beautiful in the way that magazine covers were beautiful, flawless, untouchable, and completely without warmth. Evangeline. Davis's voice shifted, becoming polite but distant, like a stranger making small talk at a charity gala. You're early. Someone has to ensure our engagement announcement doesn't become a complete disaster. Evangeline's ice-blue eyes swept over Luna with the warmth of a winter morning in Siberia. And you are? The cleaning lady, Luna mumbled, suddenly acutely aware of her faded uniform, her coffee-stained apron, and the way her dark curls were escaping from her practical ponytail. How rustic. Evangeline's smile could have frozen champagne at 20 paces. Davis, shouldn't you be preparing? The photographer from Vanity Fair arrives at noon for our engagement spread. New York's most powerful couple won't photograph itself. The words hit Luna like a physical blow to the chest. Engagement spread. The society pages had been buzzing for weeks about Davis Westbrook's impending marriage to Manhattan's most eligible socialite. Luna had tried to ignore the rumors, but hearing it confirmed felt like watching her favorite movie end with the wrong couple together. Davis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle twitching beneath his perfectly sculpted cheekbone. Of course. The arrangement. Don't call it that in front of the staff, darling. Evangeline's laugh sounded like crystal breaking. We wouldn't want to give people the wrong impression about our passionate romance. Each word was a tiny dagger to Luna's already fragile heart. She'd been living in a daydream, imagining that maybe somehow a man like Davis could see past her humble background to the woman beneath. But reality was now standing in designer heels and a Chanel suit, reminding her exactly where she belonged in this world. "Well," Davis said, his eyes finding Luna's one last time, something unreadable flickering in their gray depths. "It seems that coffee will have to wait. Pemberton, please ensure Miss Delacroix receives compensation for any damaged equipment." As he walked away with Evangeline draped on his arm like an expensive accessory, Luna stood alone among the glittering remains of the chandelier, her dreams scattered just as thoroughly across the cold marble floor. But something in Davis's expression, a flash of longing, perhaps even regret, made her wonder if she'd imagined the spark between them. Or if maybe, just maybe, the most powerful man in New York felt just as trapped as she did. 3 hours later, Luna stood in the mansion's gleaming kitchen, staring at the most intimidating coffee machine she'd ever encountered. The beast looked like it belonged in a NASA laboratory rather than a domestic kitchen, all chrome and digital displays with more buttons than a jet cockpit. Her reflection wavered in its polished surface, showing a woman who clearly didn't belong in this world of marble countertops and gold-plated fixtures. "It's not going to bite you," came a familiar voice from behind her. Luna spun around so fast she nearly knocked over a crystal vase filled with white orchids. Davis stood in the doorway, having traded his coffee-stained Armani for a casual navy sweater that somehow made him look even more devastatingly handsome. His dark hair was still slightly tousled, and those steel-gray eyes held an amused warmth that made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Westbrook, I mean Davis?" she stammered, her Brazilian accent thickening with nerves. "I thought you were busy with your engagement photos." "Postponed." His smile was mysterious, like he was harboring a delicious secret. Evangeline had a wardrobe emergency. Apparently, her dress clashed with her aura, or something equally catastrophic. Luna couldn't help but giggle, then immediately covered her mouth, horrified at her unprofessional response. "I shouldn't laugh. She's going to be your wife." "Is she?" Davis moved closer, close enough that she could smell that intoxicating cologne again. "Interesting assumption. But the engagement announcement was arranged by our families when we were still in diapers." Davis's voice carried a bitter edge that made Luna's heart ache. The Westbrook and Ashworth Sterling dynasties uniting their fortunes. Very romantic, don't you think? Luna's hands trembled as she turned back to the coffee machine, desperate for something to do with her nervous energy. "Love matches aren't really for people like you, are they? I mean, people in your world." "People in my world," Davis repeated softly, moving to stand beside her. "And what world is that exactly?" "The world where chandeliers cost more than houses, where marriages are business mergers and love is a luxury you can't afford." Luna's voice was barely a whisper. "Where people like me don't belong." Davis was quiet for a long moment, studying her profile as she fiddled with the coffee machine's incomprehensible controls. "You know, I built my first fortune developing software that democratized stock trading. My philosophy was that everyone deserves access to the same opportunities, regardless of their background. That's different. That's business." "Is it?" His hand covered hers on the machine, warm and steady. "Luna, what if I told you that the most important conversations I've had in years weren't in boardrooms or country clubs, but with a woman who speaks 3 languages, sends money home to her family in Brazil, and can apparently destroy priceless antiques with her elbow?" Luna's breath caught. "I'd say you're being kind to the help." "The help?" Davis's laugh was soft but frustrated. "You have a degree in literature from São Paulo University. You're fluent in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. You're working 3 jobs to support your family and pay for your brother's education. That's not help, Luna. That's heroic." She turned to face him, eyes wide with surprise. "How do you know all that?" "I make it my business to know about the people who work for me." His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. "But I looked deeper into your file because I was curious about the woman who could make me forget about hostile takeovers and board meetings." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the air charged with electricity. Luna could feel her resolve crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Davis, this is crazy. You're getting married in 6 weeks to a woman who's perfect for your world. Perfect for my world, maybe, but completely wrong for me. Davis's other hand cupped her cheek, his touch feather-light. Do you want to know what I was thinking about during my morning shower? Luna's voice came out as a whisper. What? Whether your laugh sounds the same when you're truly happy, not just being polite. Whether you talk in your sleep. Whether you taste as sweet as you look when you're concentrating on something. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Luna's knees nearly buckled. Davis, she breathed, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. I know it's insane, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. I know we're from different worlds, but Luna, in 30 years of life, I've never felt anything like what I felt when I saw you fall apart over spilling coffee on me. Not because of the accident, but because you cared so much about doing the right thing. The kitchen door swung open with a bang and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Pemberton stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension crackling in the air. Mr. Westbrook, Miss Ashworth Sterling has returned and requires your immediate attention. Something about the photographer having a creative vision that doesn't align with her aesthetic preferences. Davis closed his eyes for a moment, his mask of composed billionaire sliding back into place. Of course she does. Tell her I'll be right there. Very good, sir. Pemberton's gaze flicked to Luna, who was desperately trying to look busy with the coffee machine. Shall I have someone else assist Miss Delacroix with the coffee service? No, Davis said firmly, his eyes never leaving Luna's face. Miss Delacroix and I aren't finished with our conversation. After Pemberton left, the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Luna finally found her voice. You should go. Your fiancé is waiting. Luna, please. She turned away, her heart breaking with each word. This is hard enough without making it harder. Davis moved behind her, his breath warm against her ear. What if I told you I was going to call off the engagement? Luna's hand stilled on the coffee machine. Are you? I don't know, he admitted, his honesty more devastating than any lie. My family's business relationships, my father's legacy, hundreds of employees who depend on the Ashworth-Sterling merger. It's complicated. Then don't make promises you can't keep. Luna's voice was steady, even though her heart was shattering. I've been poor my whole life, Davis. I can survive being poor, but I can't survive being the reason you destroy everything you've built. Davis was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. What if everything I've built isn't worth having without you in it? Before Luna could answer, Evangeline's voice echoed through the mansion like a siren call. Davis, where are you? The photographer is threatening to leave. Davis straightened, his businessman persona clicking back into place like armor. We'll continue this conversation later. Will we? Luna asked softly. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with an expression that was part longing, part determination, and completely heartbreaking. Luna, I've never walked away from a challenge in my life. I'm not about to start now. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Luna slumped against the counter, her heart racing like a hummingbird's wings. She just had the most romantic conversation of her life with a man who was completely unavailable. But the way he'd looked at her, the way his voice had roughened when he said her name. Maybe, just maybe, some fairy tales were worth fighting for. Even if the odds were stacked against her like a house of cards in a hurricane. 2 weeks had passed since the kitchen confession, and Luna had become a master of the art of invisible cleaning. She'd perfected the technique of dusting furniture while Davis was in meetings, polishing windows when he was on conference calls, and mysteriously vanishing whenever Evangeline's Louboutin heels clicked across the marble floors. But tonight, fate had other plans. Absolutely not, Luna protested, staring at the emerald green gown hanging in her tiny studio apartment like it was a venomous snake. Her best friend and fellow housekeeper, Carmen Rodriguez, stood beside it with the satisfaction of a fairy godmother who'd just pulled off her greatest magic trick. Absolutely yes, Carmen countered, her hands on her hips in a pose that meant business. The Westbrook Annual Charity Masquerade is tonight and you're going to be there. Carmen, I clean their toilets. I don't attend their parties. Luna gestured helplessly at the dress, which probably cost more than her yearly salary. Where did you even get this? Mrs. Ashworth Sterling's closet. She returned it because it made her look too ethnic, whatever that means. Carmen's eye roll could have powered a small city. One woman's casual racism is another woman's perfect disguise. Luna touched the silk fabric reverently. It was gorgeous, a deep emerald that would complement her olive skin and dark hair perfectly. The kind of dress that could transform a cleaning lady into a princess, at least for one night. I can't crash a charity ball, what if someone recognizes me? Hence the masquerade mask's genius. Carmen held up an intricate golden mask decorated with emerald feathers. Besides, you speak 3 languages, you have a literature degree, and you know more about art history than half those socialites combined. You belong there more than most of them. 3 hours later, Luna stood at the entrance of the Westbrook Estate's grand ballroom, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The transformation was remarkable. The gown fit like it was made for her. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and the mask concealed enough of her features to make her unrecognizable. She looked like she belonged in this world of crystal chandeliers and champagne fountains. The ballroom was a fairy tale come to life. Hundreds of candles cast a warm glow over the dancing couples, while a string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. Everyone wore elaborate masks, peacock feathers, Venetian lace, jeweled butterflies, creating an atmosphere of mystery and romance. And then she saw him. Davis stood near the French doors leading to the garden, devastatingly handsome in a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. His mask was simple black leather that somehow made his gray eyes even more striking. He was listening politely to a group of elderly philanthropists, but his posture screamed boredom. Evangeline hung on his arm like a designer accessory, resplendent in white silk and diamonds, her platinum hair styled in perfect Hollywood waves. Her mask was more tiara than disguise, white gold encrusted with enough diamonds to blind a satellite. She looked like an ice queen, beautiful and untouchable. Luna was debating whether to flee when a waiter appeared at her elbow with champagne. "Compliments of the gentleman by the piano," he murmured, nodding toward a distinguished older man who raised his glass in her direction. Before Luna could respond, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "I believe that champagne is mine." She turned to find Davis standing impossibly close, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Up close, she could see the subtle designer stubble along his jaw, smell his cologne mixing with the scent of expensive champagne and gardenias. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake," Luna began, but Davis was already taking the champagne flute from her nerveless fingers. "No mistake, I've been watching you since you arrived." His voice was low, intimate, meant only for her ears. "You move like music, did you know that? Like you're dancing even when you're standing still." Luna's pulse quickened. Did he recognize her? It was impossible to tell behind the mask. "You're very kind, but I should dance with me." It wasn't a question. Davis set down both champagne flutes and extended his hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Please." Every rational thought in Luna's head screamed at her to refuse, to run, to remember her place. But something in his voice, raw and almost desperate, made her place her gloved hand in his. The moment they stepped onto the dance floor, the world around them seemed to fade. Davis's arm encircled her waist, pulling her close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body through the silk of her gown. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, his lead confident and sure, her body responding instinctively to his every movement. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine. "Mysterious. Dangerous. Dangerous." Luna's laugh was breathless. "I don't think I've ever been called dangerous before. Trust me, you are." His hand pressed against the small of her back, drawing her closer. "You make me want to do reckless things, stupid things, like forget about duty and responsibility and everything I've been taught about maintaining appearances." The music swelled around them, and Luna felt herself falling deeper under his spell. This was madness, dancing with her boss at his engagement party, pretending to be someone she wasn't, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could come true. "You don't even know who I am," she whispered. "Don't I?" His eyes searched her face and Luna's heart nearly stopped. "I know you have the most expressive eyes I've ever seen. I know you bite your lower lip when you're nervous. I know you smell like jasmine and possibility." Before Luna could respond, the music changed to a dramatic tango, and Davis spun her away from him before pulling her back with a flourish that made her laugh with pure joy. They moved across the floor like they were starring in their own private movie, other couples stepping aside to give them room. It was perfect. It was magical. It was completely and utterly doomed. "Davis!" Evangeline's voice cut through the music like a sword through silk. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." The spell shattered. Davis's steps faltered, and Luna suddenly remembered where she was, who she was, and exactly how much trouble she was in. "Evangeline," Davis said, his voice carefully controlled. "I was just dancing with someone who isn't your fiancé." Ice dripped from every word. Evangeline's eyes fixed on Luna with laser-like intensity, searching for any hint of recognition behind the golden mask. "How interesting." "It's just a dance," Davis replied, but his hand was still warm against Luna's back, possessive and protective. "Is it?" Evangeline stepped closer, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, mystery woman, you certainly dance beautifully. Have we met? You seem familiar." Luna's mouth went dry. Even with the mask, she was playing a dangerous game. "I don't think so. I would remember." Evangeline's eyes narrowed. "Strange. I have an excellent memory for faces. And yours." She tilted her head, studying Luna like a predator sizing up prey. "Well, I'm sure it will come to me." The threat hung in the air like expensive perfume, cloying and inescapable. Luna knew she had to leave before Evangeline figured out exactly why she looked familiar. "If you'll excuse me," Luna said, stepping away from Davis with every ounce of willpower she possessed. "I should be going." "Wait." Davis caught her hand, his grip desperate. "I don't even know your name." Luna looked back at him, memorizing every detail of his face behind the black mask. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the intensity in his gray eyes, the slight dimple in his left cheek when he almost smiled. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved," she whispered, then slipped away into the crowd like smoke. She made it to the garden before the tears started falling, ruining her carefully applied makeup and probably staining the borrowed dress. Behind her, the music and laughter continued, a soundtrack to the most beautiful and heartbreaking night of her life. She'd had her Cinderella moment, danced with her prince, and felt like she belonged in his world. But midnight had come, and she was just Luna Delacroix again, a cleaning lady who'd borrowed a dress and stolen a dance with a man who could never be hers. The worst part? For those few magical minutes on the dance floor, she'd forgotten that it was all pretend. The morning after the masquerade ball arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train, carrying drama and disaster. Luna stood in the mansion's laundry room at dawn, scrubbing champagne stains from tablecloths while trying to convince herself that the previous night had been nothing more than a beautiful dream. The emerald gown hung in her closet at home, like evidence of a crime she'd committed against her own heart. "You look like death warmed over," Carmen observed, wheeling in a cart of linens. "Let me guess, you spent all night crying into a pint of ice cream while watching The Notebook?" "Something like that," Luna muttered, attacking a particularly stubborn stain with unnecessary violence. The truth was, she'd spent all night replaying every moment of dancing with Davis, torturing herself with the memory of his voice calling her beautiful, mysterious, dangerous. "Luna." Carmen's voice was suddenly serious. "We have a problem." Before Luna could ask what kind of problem, the laundry room door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Evangeline stood in the doorway like an avenging angel in head-to-toe white Chanel, her ice blue eyes blazing with the fury of a woman who'd solved a puzzle and didn't like the answer. "You," Evangeline said, pointing one perfectly manicured finger at Luna, like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. "You were at the ball last night." Luna's hand stilled on the tablecloth, her heart stopping completely before launching into overdrive. "I'm sorry, Miss Ashworth Sterling, but I don't know what you mean. I was at home last night, like always." "Don't lie to me." Evangeline stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown to execution. "I know it was you dancing with my fiancé. That little beauty mark by your left ear, the way you unconsciously touch your collarbone when you're nervous. You can't hide behind a mask and think I won't notice." Carmen positioned herself between Luna and Evangeline like a bodyguard, her expression fierce. "Mrs. Ashworth Sterling, with all due respect, Luna was with me last night. We watched telenovelas and ate takeout Chinese food." "How touching, lying for your friend." Evangeline's smile could have frozen hell itself. "But I have security footage of a woman in an emerald gown arriving alone in a taxi at 8:47 p.m. The same woman who disappeared into the garden at 11:23 p.m. Would you like to see it?" Luna felt the walls closing in around her like a perfectly tailored trap. "Even if I was there, which I'm not saying I was, it's not illegal to attend a charity event." "Oh, but it is illegal to steal." Evangeline held up her phone, displaying a crystal-clear photo of Luna in the emerald gown. "That dress was taken from my closet without permission. That, my dear cleaning lady, is theft." The blood drained from Luna's face. She'd walked right into Evangeline's trap, and now the socialite held all the cards. "What do you want?" Luna asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Smart girl, I want you to resign from your position here immediately. Pack your things, disappear from Davis's life, and never contact him again." Evangeline's voice was silk, wrapped around steel. "Do this and I'll forget about the dress, the trespassing, and the fact that you've been seducing my fiancé." "I haven't seduced anyone," Luna protested, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew how hollow they sounded. "Haven't you? Poor little cleaning girl from Brazil, working so hard to support her family, so noble and pure." Evangeline's tone dripped with mockery. "Davis has always had a weakness for sob stories, but this ends now. And if I refuse, then I'll have you arrested for theft, fired from all 3 of your jobs, and deported back to Brazil before the week is out." Evangeline's smile was razor sharp. "Don't test me, Luna. I have connections you can't even imagine." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Luna knew Evangeline had the power to destroy her life with a phone call. But the thought of walking away from Davis, of never seeing him again, felt like someone was carving out her heart with a rusty spoon. "I need time to think," Luna said finally. "You have until tonight. The engagement party is tomorrow and I want you gone before then." Evangeline turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Oh, and Luna, stay away from Davis today. I'd hate for him to see you for what you really are before you have a chance to make the right choice." After Evangeline left, Carmen exploded. "That witch, who does she think she is, threatening you like that?" "Someone with more power than I'll ever have," Luna said numbly, sinking onto a laundry basket. "She's right, Carmen. I don't belong here. I was stupid to think." "To think what? That you deserve happiness? That a good man might see past your bank account to the amazing woman underneath?" Carmen grabbed Luna's shoulders, forcing her to meet her eyes. "Don't you dare let that ice queen convince you that you're not worthy of love." Before Luna could respond, Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "Miss Delacroix, Mr. Westbrook requires your presence in the study immediately." Luna's stomach dropped. Had Evangeline already told him about the ball? Was he going to fire her himself? The walk to Davis's study felt like a march to the gallows. Luna's hands shook as she knocked on the heavy oak door, and when his voice called for her to enter, she had to grip the doorframe for support. Davis stood behind his desk, still wearing the tuxedo shirt from the night before, though he'd lost the bow tie and jacket somewhere along the way. His hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as well as she had. "Close the door," he said without looking up from the papers scattered across his desk. Luna obeyed, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it from across the room. "I had the most interesting night," Davis began, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. "I danced with a woman who made me forget my own name. She was beautiful, intelligent, and completely mysterious, and then she disappeared like smoke." Luna forced herself to remain still, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "That sounds romantic, sir." It was. Until I realized something. Davis moved around the desk, each step bringing him closer to her. This mysterious woman knew how to waltz. Really waltz, not just shuffle around the dance floor like most people. She spoke with a slight accent that I couldn't quite place. And she had the most beautiful laugh I've ever heard. Luna's breath caught. He was describing her with perfect accuracy, but she couldn't tell if he knew it was her, or if he was just sharing his confusion. "The strangest part," Davis continued, stopping directly in front of her, "was that dancing with her felt familiar, like I'd held her before, even though I was certain we'd never met." "Maybe you have similar tastes in women," Luna suggested weakly. Davis laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Maybe. Or maybe the woman I've been falling in love with has been right under my nose this entire time." The words hit Luna like a physical blow. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he'd figured it out. "Davis, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I've been trying to piece it together all night, and I keep coming back to one impossible conclusion." His hand cupped her cheek, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his voice. "The woman who's been cleaning my house, who spilled coffee on me, who argued with me about democracy and literature, she's the same woman who danced with me last night like we were the only two people in the world." Luna closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite knowing she shouldn't. "I'm sorry, I never meant for it to happen. Carmen convinced me to go, and when you asked me to dance, I couldn't say no. Why are you apologizing for giving me the most perfect night of my life?" Davis's other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. "Luna, do you have any idea what you've done to me? I can't eat, can't sleep, can't focus on anything except the memory of holding you." "This is exactly why I have to leave," Luna whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Evangeline knows it was me. She's threatening to have me arrested, deported, destroyed, and she's right. I don't belong in your world." "My world." Davis's voice was fierce, possessive. "Luna, you are my world. Everything else is just scenery." Before she could protest, his lips found hers in a kiss that was desperate, hungry, and absolutely devastating. Luna melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with all the love and longing she'd been trying to hide. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Davis rested his forehead against hers. "I'm calling off the engagement." "You can't. Your family, the business, will survive, but I won't. Not without you." His thumb brushed away her tears. "Luna, I love you. Not your job, not your background, not what you can do for my company. I love you. The woman who argues with me about coffee, who makes me laugh, who sees me as just Davis instead of a bank account with legs." "And I love you," Luna whispered, the words torn from her heart. "Which is why I have to go. Evangeline will destroy both of us if I stay. Let her try." Davis's smile was sharp and dangerous. "She seems to have forgotten that I didn't build an empire by backing down from fights." The study door burst open and Evangeline stood there like a fury in designer clothing, her eyes blazing with rage. Well, well, isn't this touching? The billionaire and the maid declaring their undying love. Davis moved protectively in front of Luna, his entire demeanor shifting into the ruthless businessman who'd conquered Wall Street. "Evangeline, perfect timing. I was just about to call you." "Were you? How convenient." "Because I have some things to say about your little cleaning lady and her criminal activities." "Criminal activities?" Davis's voice was deadly quiet. "Choose your next words very carefully, Evangeline." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Luna realized that the real battle was just beginning. The silence in Davis's study stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Three people stood in a triangle of tension so thick it could be cut with a crystal champagne flute. Evangeline's perfectly manicured fingers clutched her phone like a weapon, while Davis positioned himself between her and Luna like a human shield made of expensive suits and righteous fury. "Criminal activities," Davis repeated, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that made billion-dollar corporations tremble. "I'm fascinated to hear your definition of crime, Evangeline." "Theft, for starters." Evangeline held up her phone, displaying the security footage of Luna in the emerald gown. "That dress was taken from my closet without permission. Then there's trespassing, attending a private event under false pretenses. And let's not forget fraud and seduction." "Seduction?" Davis's laugh was sharp enough to shatter windows. "You mean falling in love? When did that become illegal?" "When the victim is my fiancé and the perpetrator is hired help." Evangeline's smile could have frozen champagne at 20 paces. "Davis, darling, surely you can see how this looks. The poor little Brazilian girl latching onto the first rich man who shows her kindness. It's so predictable." Luna felt every word like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Davis stepped forward with the fluid grace of a predator about to strike. "Careful, Evangeline. You're about to cross a line that even our family's business arrangements won't protect you from crossing." His voice carried the kind of authority that had built empires and destroyed competitors. "Luna didn't seduce anyone. I pursued her. I fell in love with her intelligence, her integrity, and her courage. Qualities you wouldn't recognize if they came with designer labels. How romantic, and how convenient that you've discovered these feelings just weeks before our wedding." Evangeline's mask of perfect composure was beginning to crack, revealing the calculating ice queen beneath. "But love doesn't pay for your father's medical treatments, does it, Davis? Love doesn't keep Westbrook Industries from losing the Ashworth Sterling accounts. Love doesn't prevent your precious company from collapsing when I pull my family's investments." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Luna watched Davis's face go pale as the implications hit him. She'd known the engagement was about business, but she hadn't realized how completely Evangeline's family had their hooks in Westbrook Industries. "You're bluffing," Davis said, but uncertainty flickered in his gray eyes. "Am I? One phone call to my father, and the Ashworth Sterling Group pulls out of the merger. 2 phone calls and we liquidate our Westbrook stock holdings. 3 phone calls and I make sure every society page in New York knows that Davis Westbrook was seduced by his cleaning lady." Evangeline's smile was pure venom. "Your reputation will be destroyed, your company will be worthless, and your father's experimental cancer treatments? Well, those are expensive when you don't have a trust fund to pay for them." Luna felt her world crumble around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. She'd known this moment would come, the moment when reality crashed through their fairy tale with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Davis had to choose between love and everything else that mattered in his life. "Stop," Luna said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Both Davis and Evangeline turned to look at her, and she squared her shoulders with all the dignity she could muster. "This ends now." "Luna, don't," Davis began, but she held up a hand to silence him. "No, Davis, she's right." The words tasted like ashes in Luna's mouth, but she forced them out anyway. "I don't belong in your world. I was foolish to think that love could bridge the gap between who you are and who I am." "That's not true, and you know it," Davis said fiercely, reaching for her hands. "Luna, we can fight this. Together." "Fight with what?" Luna's laugh was bitter and broken. "You heard her. She can destroy everything you've built, everything your father needs. I won't be responsible for that." "So you're just going to give up? Walk away?" Davis's voice cracked with emotion. "After everything we've shared, everything we've felt, I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning." Luna pulled her hands free from his, each movement feeling like tearing off pieces of her own heart. "I'm going to remember my place." "Your place?" Davis looked like she'd slapped him. "Your place is with me. Your place is wherever you want it to be because you're brilliant and strong and poor," Luna interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "I'm poor, Davis, and in your world, that makes me nothing." "That's not—" "It is." Luna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, forcing herself to stand straighter. Evangeline, you win. I'll resign today, leave the city, and never contact Davis again. In exchange, you leave my references intact so I can find work elsewhere. How magnanimous of you. Evangeline purred, victory making her practically glow. Though I think a non-disclosure agreement would be appropriate as well. We wouldn't want any unfortunate tell-all interviews surfacing in a few years. Fine, Luna agreed, even though each word felt like swallowing broken glass. Luna, no. Davis grabbed her arm, his grip desperate. I won't let you do this. I won't let her win. Luna looked up at him, memorizing every detail of his face. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he was upset. The tiny scar by his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd told her about. The way his eyes turned stormy gray when he was fighting for something he believed in. You're not letting her win, Luna whispered. You're letting me save the man I love. Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed him one last time. It was soft and desperate and full of all the words she couldn't say. How much she loved him, how she'd never forget him, how he'd given her a glimpse of what happiness could feel like. When she pulled away, Davis looked shattered. Luna, please. There has to be another way. There is, said a crisp British voice from the doorway. Though it requires all parties to have significantly more spine than they've shown thus far. Everyone turned to see Pemberton standing in the entrance, no longer the invisible, perfect butler. His posture was straight, his expression sharp with intelligence, and his eyes held the kind of authority that came from years of seeing everything and saying nothing. Pemberton? Davis blinked in confusion. What are you doing here? My job, sir, which it turns out involves more than just managing your household. Pemberton stepped into the room with the confidence of a man who held all the cards. Miss Ashworth Sterling, I believe you'll find your threats significantly less effective when the person you're threatening has access to 30 years of Ashworth Sterling family secrets. Evangeline's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? Shall we discuss your father's creative accounting practices? Or perhaps your brother's gambling debts that your family has been covering up? Or maybe we should talk about the insider trading investigation that's been quietly building against Ashworth Sterling Industries for the past 6 months? The silence that followed was deafening. Evangeline looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying devastating revelations. You see, Pemberton continued conversationally, when you work for the same family for 3 decades, you tend to overhear things. And when you have an excellent memory and a talent for organization, you tend to remember those things. Sometimes you even document them. What do you want? Evangeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nothing dramatic. Simply for you to release Mr. Westbrook from this engagement gracefully, citing irreconcilable differences. In exchange, the Pemberton archive remained sealed indefinitely. Davis stared at his butler like he'd never seen him before. Pemberton, you magnificent, terrifying man. How long have you been planning this? Since the day Miss Delacroix spilled coffee on you, sir. It was quite obvious that you were falling in love, and equally obvious that Miss Ashworth Sterling would not take kindly to the development. Pemberton's small smile was satisfaction personified. I've simply been preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Evangeline looked between Pemberton and Davis, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. Fine. I'll break the engagement. But don't think this is over, Davis. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything. The only mistake I made was agreeing to marry you in the first place, Davis replied, his arm sliding around Luna's waist. Pemberton, draft whatever paperwork is necessary. I want this ended officially. Already prepared, sir. Miss Ashworth Sterling simply needs to sign. As Evangeline stalked out of the study, muttering threats and imprecations, Davis turned to Luna with an expression of pure joy mixed with disbelief. So, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It appears we're both unemployed. You've resigned and I've just blown up my engagement and probably my business relationships. Davis, I never meant for me to choose love over money, for me to pick happiness over obligation. Davis cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she didn't realize were still falling. Luna, You didn't make me choose. You showed me there was never really a choice at all. But your father's treatments, the company, will survive or they won't. But I know I won't survive without you." His forehead touched hers, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Besides, I seem to remember mentioning that I built my first fortune from nothing. If I have to do it again, at least this time I'll have the most amazing woman in the world by my side." "Are you sure?" Luna asked, hardly daring to believe that their story might actually have a happy ending. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Davis's smile was brighter than every chandelier in the mansion combined. "Luna Delacroix, will you do me the honor of letting me spend the rest of my life proving that love really can conquer all?" Luna's answer was lost in another kiss, this one full of promise and forever, and the kind of happiness that only comes from finding your perfect match in the most imperfect circumstances. In the background, Pemberton cleared his throat discreetly. "Shall I prepare the champagne, sir? I believe a celebration is in order." "The good stuff, Pemberton," Davis said without taking his eyes off Luna. "We're celebrating the beginning of the rest of our lives." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment, casting golden light across the hardwood floors and illuminating the woman who had completely transformed Davis Westbrook's world. Luna stood at the kitchen island, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders as she hummed a Brazilian melody and prepared coffee with the precision of a master craftsman. She wore one of Davis's Oxford shirts over leggings, looking more beautiful than any woman had a right to at 7 in the morning. "You know," Davis said from the doorway, his voice still rough with sleep, "I used to think the best part of waking up was checking the stock market. Now I know it's watching you make coffee in my kitchen." Luna turned with a smile that could have powered the entire city. "Your kitchen? I seem to remember signing a lease that says this is our kitchen now." "Best investment I ever made," Davis murmured, crossing to wrap his arms around her waist from behind. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, breathing in the scent of jasmine and possibility that had become his favorite perfume. "How did the call with your brother go last night?" "Miguel got the internship at the engineering firm in Sao Paulo." Luna's excitement was infectious, her entire body practically vibrating with joy. "And he said to tell you that if you hurt his sister, he'll invent a robot specifically designed to kick your ass." "I like him already," Davis laughed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Speaking of family, my father wants to know when you're coming to dinner again. Apparently you're the only person who can beat him at chess." "That's because I learned from my grandmother, who was the neighborhood champion in Rio." Luna leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "She would have loved you, you know. She always said that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account, but by how he treats the people who can do nothing for him. Smart woman, though I'd argue that you've done everything for me." Davis spun her around to face him, his gray eyes serious despite his playful tone. "You gave me a reason to be better than I was. You showed me that building a life is more important than building an empire." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change and growth. Davis had indeed lost several major contracts when the Ashworth-Sterling engagement ended, but he discovered something remarkable. Running a smaller, more ethical company suited him far better than managing a corporate giant. Westbrook Industries now focused on sustainable technology and fair labor practices, and while the profits were smaller, the satisfaction was immeasurable. Luna had enrolled in Columbia's graduate program for comparative literature, funded by a scholarship Davis had definitely not pulled strings to arrange. She also worked part-time at a literacy center in Brooklyn, teaching English to immigrants while maintaining her own cultural identity and connections to her community. "Coffee's ready," Luna announced, pouring 2 perfect cups. "And before you ask, yes, I used the fancy Brazilian beans your assistant mysteriously keeps ordering despite my protests." "Mysterious indeed," Davis agreed solemnly, accepting his cup. "Though I suspect it has something to do with wanting the woman I love to have a little taste of home every morning." They settled onto the couch, Luna curling against Davis's side as they watched the city wake up below them. It had become their morning ritual, Coffee, conversation, and the comfortable silence of two people who had found their perfect match in the most imperfect circumstances. "Davis," Luna said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of nervous excitement that made his pulse quicken. "I have something to tell you. Good something or bad something? Potentially life-changing something." Luna sat up, turning to face him fully. "I got a call yesterday from a publisher in New York. They want to buy my novel." Davis nearly dropped his coffee cup. "Your novel? Luna, that's incredible. But wait, when did you write a novel?" "I've been working on it since I was 16. It's about a young woman who leaves Brazil to work in New York and falls in love with a devastatingly handsome billionaire who's terrible at making his own coffee." Davis's grin was so wide it hurt his face. "Something like that." Luna's cheeks flushed pink. "They want to publish it as part of their new contemporary romance line. Davis, they're offering enough money for me to pay off my student loans, send more money home to my family, and maybe even buy my grandmother that little house she's always wanted." "Luna, that's amazing." Davis pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the living room as she laughed with pure joy. "I'm so proud of you. You're going to be a published author." "I can't believe it's real," Luna said when he finally set her down. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still dreaming about all of this. The apartment, the school, you, especially you. If this is a dream, I never want to wake up," Davis murmured, cupping her face in his hands. "Luna, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A purpose beyond profit margins, a reason to come home at night, a future worth building." "You've given me the same thing," Luna whispered. "You saw me when I was invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You fought for us when I was ready to give up." Their kiss was soft and sweet, full of the contentment that comes from knowing you've found your forever person. When they broke apart, Davis rested his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper that still made her knees weak. "Luna Delacroix, I have a question for you. Ask away." Davis reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Luna's heart stop completely. "I know we said we'd take things slow. I know we've only been together 6 months. But I also know that I've loved you since the moment you spilled coffee on me and cared more about my shirt than your job." Luna's hands flew to her mouth as Davis dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring. Not the ostentatious diamond that Evangeline had worn, but something elegant and timeless, with a central emerald surrounded by smaller diamonds. "This was my grandmother's ring," Davis said, his voice rough with emotion. "She was a teacher who married a janitor, and they had the kind of love that lasted 60 years. My grandfather told me to save it for a woman who would love me for who I am, not what I have." "Davis," Luna breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Luna Delacroix, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales can come true, even for billionaires and cleaning ladies who fall in love over spilled coffee and broken chandeliers?" "Yes," Luna laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her finger all along. As Davis stood and kissed her again, Luna marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from that disastrous morning in the foyer to this perfect moment in their shared living room. "You know," Luna said when they finally came up for air, "we're going to have the most interesting love story to tell our children." "Children?" Davis raised an eyebrow, his smile playful. "Already planning our future, Mrs. Soon-to-be Westbrook." "Someone has to," Luna retorted, then grew serious. "Davis, are you sure about this? About us? Your world is going to have opinions about you marrying the former cleaning lady." "Let them talk," Davis said firmly. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Besides, former cleaning lady is a terrible way to describe a brilliant, multilingual, soon-to-be published novelist who happens to be the love of my life." A knock at the door interrupted their moment, and they looked at each other in confusion. "Expecting anyone?" Davis asked. "At 8 in the morning on a Saturday?" "Absolutely not." Davis opened the door to find Pemberton standing in the hallway, looking impeccable despite the early hour. Behind him stood Carmen, practically bouncing with excitement. "Pemberton? What are you doing here?" "Miss Rodriguez contacted me with some rather urgent news, sir. It seems congratulations are in order." Pemberton's small smile was pure satisfaction. "Though I should mention that the champagne is chilling in your kitchen, and I've taken the liberty of arranging brunch for 4. "How did you—" Luna began, then stopped and laughed. "Of course you knew. You always know everything. It's my job to anticipate your needs, Miss Delacroix. Soon to be Mrs. Westbrook, I presume." Pemberton's eyes twinkled with genuine affection. "If I may say so, sir, you've chosen exceptionally well." Carmen pushed past the butler to envelope Luna in a massive hug. "I can't believe you didn't call me immediately. I had to find out from Pemberton's text that you were getting engaged." "You texted Carmen?" Davis stared at his former butler. "How did you even know?" "The ring box has been missing from your sock drawer for 3 days, sir. Elementary deduction." Pemberton moved past them into the apartment with the confidence of a man who had never met a situation he couldn't handle. "Now shall we celebrate properly? I believe this calls for the crystal." As their small chosen family gathered in the kitchen, Luna caught Davis's eye across the room. He was laughing at something Carmen was saying, his face more relaxed and happy than she'd ever seen it. The morning light caught the emerald on her finger, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, a cleaning lady with dreams she was afraid to voice. Now she was an engaged woman with a book deal, a graduate degree in progress, and the love of the most incredible man she'd ever met. But the best part wasn't the dramatic transformation of her circumstances. It was the way Davis looked at her, like she was his whole world. Like she'd always been worthy of love, like their story was just beginning. "What are you thinking about?" Davis asked, sliding his arms around her waist as Pemberton and Carmen debated champagne glasses versus coffee mugs for their impromptu celebration. "Just this," Luna said, gesturing to encompass everything. The laughter, the morning light, the ring on her finger, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. "I'm thinking that sometimes the best stories start with the biggest disasters." "In that case," Davis murmured against her ear, "we're going to have the greatest love story ever told." Outside, New York hummed with its usual energy, full of people chasing dreams and building lives and falling in love in the most unexpected ways. But inside their sunlit apartment, 4 people who had become family raised their glasses in a toast to love, second chances, and the magic that happens when 2 hearts recognize their perfect match. The end.